that a lot of the present psychologies do what I would call spiritual bypassing. Like they just want to get it one and done. You've dealt with your trauma. You're all better. Move on with your life. And I'm afraid that may be selling them snake oil, okay? Selling them something that promises healing. I'd much rather sell somebody a process of unfolding into wholeness that can stand them.
Awekenge, this is Mental Metals, hosted by Asekho.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Metals. I'm your host, Asekho, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
Right, you can't get off an island when there's a hurricane coming. You have to lean into it. And after that hurricane, I began having terrible nightmares. So I went for hypnotherapy. In the hypnosis, we went looking for the hurricane to see my experience of it and how it traumatized me. And instead of the hurricane, what we found was a baby, me, lying on a changing table, and my father is screaming at me. So I got back to my office that afternoon and I called my mother and I said, "Mom, did Daddy ever yell at me on the changing table?" She was very quiet. And then she said, "How could you remember that?" And this was back at a time when they were claiming that hypnosis caused false memories. But my mother told me this was a real memory. So over the next few years, I gathered stories about what happened to me in those first few weeks of life. My mother got sick when I was 6 weeks old. And my father was preparing the first milk for me to drink from a bottle because my mother couldn't breastfeed any longer. My dad spilled cigarette ashes in the milk. The only milk in the house was now undrinkable while I was in a hunger storm, like a baby is. And when babies are hungry, it's like a thunderstorm rolls in and it storms until you give them the milk. Well, my dad had to get in the car and drive to a store and buy the milk and bring it home. And by that time, something in me had broken and basically just flown off. As you know, with trauma, we have 4 responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawning, which is where you just pretend everything's okay and you're just very codependent. But I froze and then I flew away. Retrieving that memory and then eventually retrieving other memories allowed me to do what I call soul retrieval, which was going and finding the hurt parts of me that had been pushed way, way down because they weren't recognized. One of the definitions of trauma is having feelings in a situation where those feelings are not welcome, where they're not heard, they're not understood. And so as children, we just want to look good. We want our parents to love us. So we will do anything for that love, including pretending that we're okay when we're not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And with that, I have a follow-up question. And you mentioned that I agree with you in terms of as children, we want to be loved by our parents. How do we actually realize that we come to a point of pretending. In terms of, that was my question, how do we actually as children come to a point of pretending? And I agree, when we are adults, we have that thing of actually learning how to pretend with things that we've seen. But as children, it's quite, when you are a child, I believe that when you're a child, we actually have that sense of, I don't know anything, so I will do everything that I see within my parents. And definitely, in my case, I would say that I've learned in terms of pretending through my mother or something that I looked up to. So how do we actually realize that we are pretending as children?
Well, there's something called mirroring in the brain, where when our mommy smiles at us and we smile back, we both feel wonderful.
Mm.
And if we are not smiling and our mothers get upset or our fathers get upset that we're unhappy or crying too much, they make a face that says, I'm not pleased with you.
Mm.
And then we try to get back their smile. We're striving. And striving is a very painful thing to do sometimes. When you don't feel okay inside and you want to put on a big smile and make them happy, so then they'll smile at you again and tickle you and give you a cookie and think you're wonderful. And so we mirror each other, like mommy says, I'm wonderful because I'm with the wonderful you. And baby says, I'm wonderful because I'm with the wonderful you. And the moment that goes sideways, the moment that we're not pleasing them, we get a face that says, you're displeasing me. And so we begin to develop a persona, a mask that says, I'm okay, I'm great. A terrible thing just happened, but I'm okay. And we get rewarded for being okay. And those parts of us that are rejected, those parts of us that are unhappy or scared, insecure, get pushed away into what Carl Jung called the shadow. Everybody has one. It's everything that everybody rejected of us. So we push it into the shadow. And I believe that that is a huge part of mental illness. That we have darkness within us and it's not welcome. And the great thing about therapy is it's your time to tell your story and connect with the emotions that you may not have been safe to feel as a child.
And you've mentioned the shadow, and there's something that I want to go back, but I just want to, in terms of, I want us to focus on this thing of the shadow. And I've seen, I think it was Jordan Peterson, and I think he once mentioned it. And I feel like we have, in a way of, yes, in terms of darkness, we have seen it as something that is terrible. At some context, it is terrible, but at the same time, I feel like it can actually help us in a way of reaching our full potential. The reason I say that, reaching our full potential, because of, while in terms of, I would say, when you are in the light, so there's things that you're quite afraid of. And you actually stop yourself from doing such things in terms of, you have low confidence. You don't have that self-confidence of telling yourself that I will achieve this. Actually, start taking care of myself. I'll stop pleasing people. When it comes to darkness, you have that confidence booster that I don't care what people say about me. I'll do what I do. So, in a way of, what I'm trying to say is, can you elaborate on more what the shadow really means? Because actually, one of the people that I'm trying to learn from is Carl Jung. I've been actually trying to search out in terms of the interpretation of dreams, things like that. So, can you elaborate on what actually the shadow really entails?
Well, it's hard to understand because it's governed by the unconscious, which means that we can't really think about it. We can try to think about it, and it emerges. And as soon as we see it and go, there it is, it's hatred, or it's rejecting ourselves, or judging ourselves so harshly, or hating others. And we see it and we go, that's part of the shadow. And then the moment we see it and we think, I got it, I found it, whoosh, it goes back into the unconscious. It's like the way that I would describe it to my patients is like meeting the shadow is like trying to catch a fish in a river with your bare hands, right? So something slides by and touches your leg and you reach down and you try to grab it. It's gone. But you want to conceive of it as part of maturing, as part of your adult development. So often it comes to you in nightmares. It'll come in. The first time I encountered shadow after I got sober and went to graduate school, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was still inside the dream, but it felt like I was awake in the hallway of my house. And in the hallway of my house was a man with a red and black striped shirt on, and his legs turned into helicopter rotors, like razor blades. And he came zooming toward me like he was going to shred me. Right? In dream tending, what we do is we pause and we say, why are you here? Why are you visiting me now, you dark, scary figure? And if we can imagine that it's carrying medicine, that it's carrying news about parts of ourselves that have been disowned, like I'm afraid I'll never be loved, or I'm afraid I'll never be good enough to be successful. They seem like very simple things, but we push them down. Also in there are unacceptable feelings of, how do I love my mother and hate my mother at the same time? How do I love my father and hate my father at the same time? My sisters, my brothers, my schoolmates. So things get pushed down in there because society and family say, no, that's bad. And so we push it into the shadow, but it's not evil. What's in there are just feelings that have been turned into something dark and scary. When we bring them out, picture it this way. A poet once put this very beautifully who studied Carl Jung. His name was Robert Bly. He said, the shadow is like when we're born, we're a beautiful globe of light. And then something happens and a piece of our light is shoved into a bag. And then we grow up and we learn how to run and walk, and something happens and we're embarrassed or shamed. And another piece of our light is put into the sack. And then we go to school and we make a mistake. We raise our hands. We say something stupid. Somebody makes fun of us or bullies us, and more of our light is pushed into that sack. And that sack is the shadow. By the time you come to psychotherapy or to a 12-step program or to a community where you're trying to heal, you begin to take these broken pieces out of the sack and say, here's me. I'm so afraid. Here's me. I hate myself. Here's me. I'm afraid nobody will love me. And we reclaim our light. We get it back, but we're never finished with it. Most therapies promise that you're going to meet the shadow, engage the shadow, and mission accomplished. And it's a lifelong process. We get better at it in our 30s and 40s. We get much better at it in our 60s, 70s, 80s, and on, when we have the maturity and the patience to face it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. While we were actually explaining the shadow, and I just began to have such memories, actually, as we explained the first time after you saw encountering the shadow. And I would say it's something new to me because having grown in a culture and believing in supernatural beings, and able to actually at some point embracing it at the same time, actually being afraid of it. And I believe at some point that I have come across such, and at that time I didn't know about it. And not knowing. And I believe that this is the kind of conversation that I am very passionate about. That's one of the reasons why I actually started this podcast, being able to, as much as I'm providing information, but also to me actually experience these things and actually be shocked, actually in terms of getting my own mind and realizing, remember the things that I actually did. So it's quite a different conversation, quite an interesting thing. And I just wanna, as I said, that I just wanna go back. So we spoke about the trivial memories. And while the trivial memories, what kind of emotions that came up, and how was your mental well-being?
Well, the way that I've retrieved most memories is in meditation and visualization. I learned hypnotherapy many, many years ago, and I would do it with my patients and have it done with me, where you do some deep breathing. You picture a flight of stairs that can go up or down, whichever you like, 10 sturdy stairs that take you to a safe place inside you, a spiritual place. For me, I use the 100-Acre Wood from Winnie the Pooh, because it's a children's book and there's watercolors and there's nothing scary there. And while I'm there, amidst Pooh and Christopher Robin and Tigger and Kanga and Roo and all of the crew, I welcome parts of myself. Like when I was 6 years old, and this was the very first memory I had when I quit drinking, was that when I was 6 years old, I had on my little red cowgirl outfit, and I had my 6-shooter, like a good cowgirl has, and my red boots, and I went to the market man who came through our neighborhood selling candy and milk and eggs to the ladies, and I bought some gum, and I rolled it into a cigarette, and I went home to my mom to show her how cool I was. And I leaned on the door jamb, and I took a drag off of my cool cigarette and said, "Howdy, partner." And she grabbed me by the arm and started spanking me. And I went from being the most wonderful child in the world to something is very, very bad. When I revisit that little girl, and my mother shows her that she tracked dog poop across the carpeting that she didn't know she'd tracked across, that I then say to her, "You did nothing wrong. You didn't deserve to be spanked. I'm so sorry that you got rejected at that moment when you were so cool." And I thought that was enough, that I'd reclaimed her, that part of my soul was with me. But I had been having tsunami nightmares for many years, where I'm standing at the shore and a huge wave comes and I can't get away from it. So a couple of years ago, when I was in training for dream tending, I tended the dream of this man comes to stand beside me, and we're watching the waves and they're small. And suddenly the tsunami comes and he says, "Can I help you? Like, can I give you a boost over the wall or help you get away from the wave?" And in the dream, I said, "No, don't help me." But in the dream tending of it, where we dream the dream forward, I said, "Yes, please help." And when that part of me said, "Please help me," he turned to the wave and he parted it like Moses, right? And out of that wave came my little tsunami girl in her little red cowgirl outfit with her gun, and she was crying her butt off. And I'm crying, remembering it. And that was when I truly retrieved that part of my soul. I visited it, and then I visited it again, and then I visited again. Years ago, somebody said to me, "When are you going to be done working on this baby stuff, this pre-verbal stuff, this childhood stuff? How many years as a psychotherapist are you going to have to keep going in there and mining for stuff?" And I said, "I don't know if I'll ever be done." Because there's always deeper and deeper layers of who we are. That's the journey toward wholeness. It's not pathological. It's not sick. Once you're on that journey, it's a interesting, fascinating. It's like watching a new movie every day,
Mm.
putting yourself back together, putting the pieces together.
Mm. Mm. And I believe that most people are afraid to tell themselves and being able to actually try and even to work with themselves. And it's really a pandemic, and saw. I like in terms of quoting one of the people that I listen to, as I mentioned, Dr. Gabonete, and when it comes to the conversation, I'll talk. And he was on Jay Shetty podcast, and something that he spoke about is some people really enjoy comfortable pain more than uncomfortable pain. And not realizing that uncomfortable pain, that's where you actually receive that love that you've been looking for. That's where you will actually see the real change that you've been looking for. And sometimes we look and look and look everywhere and not realizing that the work we look externally, whereas we need to be looking internally. That's something that I have seen people do and have seen myself do until I decided to just be able to love myself. And one of the things that quite hard when I keep on emphasizing the fact that loving yourself, because once you start loving yourself, you realize that, yeah, I don't need any validation except for myself, for my own validation. And that's what I've been doing. That's what I'm trying to do, because I keep on saying try, because these things are not just in the flesh. You don't just do them in the flesh, think that everything the next day will be all right. As I've said, uncomfortable pain. That's it, for you to actually see things in a better way, for you to be actually actually see things in a way of, hey, I love it here, and that healing is good for me. And when you're in the place of comfortable pain, you don't have that thing of, oh, flip, healing is good. You don't have actually experience that actually that peace. You don't actually experience that thing of yeah, it's nice. And it goes back to something that just Williamson said, but is related to success. But I would like to actually bring it in when it comes to mental health and actually the path of healing. When you actually in a path of success, whether it's business, whatever you define success, you are not you don't learn with you don't learn at the point of destination, but you learn in the process of actually learning new things. Actually, I didn't know this thing about me, and that and that and that, and within that, in that process, we build then mental resilience. So I just want to speak, as I've said that when we started, I just want to speak about your book, actually, Ashes in the Milk. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I've tried to write this book twice before,
Mm.
and I tried to write it as a self-help book to help people,
Mm.
and I didn't like it. I threw it away, and I gave up.
Mm.
My father was a writer. He never finished his first novel.
Mm.
And so I felt like, oh no, I have to finish this because it's my family legacy in a way of
Mm.
somebody completing the writing of a book. So then when the pandemic happened, I had nowhere to go but inside me, because we couldn't go out and distract ourselves the way that we normally could. And I signed up for a writer's workshop with 100 other writers online. And it was called Unmute Yourself. Your Story Matters. And every day, 5 days a week, for 4 weeks in a row, we would write off of a prompt like kitchens or ocean, just a word. And we would take that word and write. And after I'd been writing for a couple of weeks, somebody said, I think you're writing a poetic memoir. And I said, I don't know what that is. He said, poetically writing about your story of your life. And so I just kept writing. Little tiny, each day was a little pearl that got strung onto a necklace. And eventually I had enough pearls to make a really fabulous necklace. And it's a story from ashes in the milk where my dad spilled the ashes and something in me froze, to when I was 6 years old and the little cowgirl got a whopping spanking. A couple of other things happened that year. But when I was 8, a neighborhood kid who was twice my age, twice my size, hit me in the face with a croquet mallet. And I nearly lost my eye. And I had a head trauma from it that nobody could understand back then. So I went back and I retrieved that 8-year-old and I wrote about it, and it was painful to write about. And then just as I felt like I was getting myself back together at age 12, my family was transferred to Tokyo, Japan from Washington, D.C. My dad was with the U.S. government. And I lost all of my friends. We didn't have email or internet back then. It took 30 days for a letter to get from Washington to Tokyo by ship. So it was, I was alienated and lost from all of my friends. And as soon as I got comfortable there, whoosh, back to the United States. Okay, so I never could find the ground under my feet. And that's when I found drugs. That's when I found alcohol. And that seemed to solve the problem. But then I got very sick and almost died from it when I was 19. So each time that I wrote about these incredibly painful, traumatic experiences in my life and was able to see how I had shaped myself, like here's the trauma and here's Valerie, and I shaped myself around the trauma so that I was all misshapen inside from trying to cope with all of these different wounds, that I was told I was fine. I shouldn't, what's the matter with you? You shouldn't be still grieving all these things that have happened. And it was when I finally got them all down that I was then able to integrate them and feel like I had myself as a whole self. The last quarter of the book is about dreams that I had during the pandemic, and they were all in service to my healing. Tsunami dreams and lots of serpents and snakes and scary things that come bearing medicine, that come bearing very powerful healing when you can tolerate the pain that the medicine, it's like when a snake bites you, it's poisonous. But if because it's happening in a dream and you're not going to be killed by it, there's a transformational thing that happens where it becomes medicine. The Buddhists call it changing poison into medicine. And that's really what this book did for me, was it helped me take poisonous trauma and turn it into medicine, both for me and I hope for my readers. And soon my listeners. I just recorded it on Audible. It'll be out in a few weeks. But then they can hear me read the poetry and read the story. And hopefully it creates like a healing trance. Okay, because unhappiness can be a destructive trance because we're rejecting our sad selves. But within that same trance, there can be healing when we go back and acknowledge the pains. So we're not pretending anymore that we're okay. When people say, how are you? Sometimes I'll say, I am a ball of anxiety. And they laugh, go, well, you don't look very anxious. And I'll say, well, it's because I just told you how anxious I am that I'm no longer anxious. So it's about being true right in the moment. How are you really? Not how do I think you need me to be?
Yes, and I believe that people put that facade in terms of just to accommodate other people and in a way of not asking too much questions. And something that you a lot again. You mentioned a lot of things. Again, I'm gonna quote Dr. Gabriel Maté. Addiction is only a symptom. A symptom. It's not a fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is trauma. And I have seen how trauma has led some people to, in a way of running to drugs, running to alcohol, because it is something that would soothe that pain. It's something that would actually, I look at it in a way of acceptance, because sometimes we are people pleasers when we come across trauma pleasers, and sometimes there are people that don't love that, and sometimes we do it to our own people, and through those people we are rejected as well. And there's alcohol and drugs, something that doesn't talk back to us, something that it will actually, in a way of listening to our pain, I put it like that. It's listening to our pain, listening to our emotions, listening to how we actually feel, and never judge. And it's something like that. I view it something like that. And it takes a lot for a person to just actually abandon those drugs and alcohol and detach themselves from it and be able to actually looking forward and want to defend themselves. And something that you mentioned, something that have changed my perception of snakes. Something that it's something that I always seen, because I always viewed it as something bad. I always viewed it as something that I don't know, like I was terrified of things. And at some point I didn't know. Even in my dreams, I was very terrified. I don't know what happened, in all honesty. I don't know what happened. Whereas when I continued on dreaming about them, I didn't have fear. I didn't have that fear of like there's a snake in my dream. And it's more or less of actually I'm facing it and it does not do anything towards me. And it was just my fear and not realizing that I was dreaming. Sometimes we actually overlook things. We overthink things of saying that, flip, when I see something that I hear in a dream, it must be the truth. And as much as to this day, I don't know what happened after I have accepted my fate in terms of, no, I'm not afraid of snakes. In my dreams, I stopped dreaming of snakes. It offered me a different perspective in a way of, like I feel like as you said that transformation, you spoke about transformation, and I feel like that was that transformation of me actually having that background. Now I'm good. Now I'm able to work on myself. Now I'm able to actually learn from people that I believe that they will actually help me. I believe that they will actually have a different view that I have. And speaking about views, it's something that I have seen. There are different perspectives. Because people, I feel like there's this tendency of just because I have my own view, your view doesn't make sense. So we are not open to actually listen to other people because, for example, this thing of snakes, I didn't actually realize that until now. And I realized, oh, wait, that must be the reason I had some type of transformation within my life. And I'm quite enjoying the conversation rather than just to I'm seeing the time. Unfortunately, you almost have time. Before I let it go, do you have anything else to add to what I've said, or anything towards the conversation that we're having?
Well, I'd like to add one caveat to the theory that Gabor Mate and others are putting forward that that all addiction and alcoholism is based in trauma and response to trauma. I think it's too general. I think that there are people who the first time they took a drink, they were off and running with a biochemical phenomenon that may have caused trauma in their lives because it hit a spot inside them that just needed the magic, like Native American people who, yes, traumatized, yes, but their genetics are not designed to metabolize alcohol. And once it hits the system, it's off and running. And it's the same with sugar with some people who have not been traumatized, but when sugar hits their system, they can't have 2 cookies. They want a whole package of cookies. So there is a physiological dance that goes on. And I'm a little concerned that the current zeitgeist around trauma is that once we've metabolized our trauma, then we can go back and drink like ladies and gentlemen. And that may not be the case, that you can fully synthesize your trauma and then go and do a little bit of recreational cocaine. Because there is addiction and it is real. And I believe that the 12-step programs, which address complete abstinence from a substance, are based in the psychology of Carl Jung, which is that once you admit you are powerless over something, that you can't change it by yourself, you open yourself to a spiritual experience. And the other 11 steps of those 12 steps are designed to look at trauma, to look at anger, resentment, fear, the painful patterns in one's life, so that one can have a spiritual awakening. I think that a lot of the present psychologies do what I would call spiritual bypassing. Like they just want to get it one and done. You've dealt with your trauma. You're all better. Move on with your life. And I'm afraid that may be selling people, selling them snake oil. Okay, selling them something that promises healing. I'd much rather sell somebody a process of unfolding into wholeness that can stand them in good stead through the rest of their life, no matter what happens. That it's not, healing is not an event, it's a process. And it's a process that it's going to go on until they put us in the ground or send us up a smokestack. We are going to be unfolding ourselves. Carl Jung called it circumambulating. We walk in circles. We revisit certain things, only we go deeper and deeper and deeper, becoming more and more whole. And the dreams then come in service to that wholeness, the spiritual path, whatever path that is. I'm not talking religion, I'm talking spiritual. It's not human-centered, it's higher power or God-centered. That when that becomes the center of your soul, you're on a journey that's going to take you through life after life after life, I think. Thank you for having me.